So my name is Russ Cohen. I'm from the town of Arlington, Mass, which is in the traditional homeland of the Massachusetts tribe. And I understand that the original indigenous name for the place was Menominee. So, I'll talk more about indigenous people as I get into my talk. But I just wanted to get some drinks set up here. Okay, so the very short story about me is 50 years ago, 1974 is the first time that I taught wild edibles, and I was a high school student, and I led other high school students around the high school to teach them. So I've been at it a little while, and I do about 40 programs like this all over New England and Eastern New York State just to connect people to the outdoors through their taste buds, okay? And I'm talking about everything that's edible, edible weeds, edible invasive species, but not today. Today I'm talking about native plants that you might want to consider planting in your own yard. All right, everybody see the slides okay? Okay, let's see if that advances. Okay, so once again, we're in indigenous homeland right here. And it's especially important for me to acknowledge this fact because a lot of the content, what I'm going to share with you today, is stuff indigenous people figured out over the thousands of years that they inhabited this area, and they really needed to know what plants were safe to eat, when were the parts ripe, where were they located in the landscape, stuff like that. And so that knowledge has trickled down to me, and I'm really grateful to share it with you. But I want to thank them for it. Okay, and if there's a book I wanted to point you to as a great source of information for those of you that are looking for more, it's this book, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmer, especially because she gets into the when is it not good to pick. So that she has this chapter called The Honorable Harvest in her book. Let's get this to work. There we go. And in here she's developed a set of principles, and she suggests that people might actually make a laminated card with this information on it and take it with them out in the woods. So they decide, okay, is it appropriate for me to harvest this plant, and how would I do it, and what process should I follow? So that would be a great thing to do. So I'll talk more about indigenous people as I'm going through the talk today. All right, so I'd like to see a show of hands. Who has not heard of a guy named Doug Tallamy? Name means nothing to you. All right, well, this is very important. He, more than anybody else I know, has been making a very eloquent statement why people should plant native plants in their yards. And it's for ecological reasons. Because he's an entomologist, he studies insects, but he had made an astute observation about birds that when our cherished migratory songbirds return from their southerly wintering habitats and they pair up, they build their nests, the eggs are laid, the eggs hatch, and little babies are clamoring for food. What are the parent birds feeding them? They're feeding them caterpillars. And where are the parent birds finding those caterpillars? On native plants. Why not on non-native plants? It's because since plants can't move, their major defense is chemical, and the way that they fend off things that, to survive is they have various chemical defenses. Well, our native insects haven't figured out how to get around the chemical defenses of the non-native plants. It takes many thousands of years of co-inhabiting the same space. So for a bird flying around a neighborhood with his only non-native plants, it's like a food desert for them because there's no caterpillars that they want to feed their babies in the nest. So that's why Doug says it's really important to plant native. And so as the word gets out, state agencies are getting the programs, nonprofits are getting the programs. They're all putting out great information about what are the native plants and where can you get them and stuff like that. So here is a list, and Kennedy's probably has a list like this. If you order any plants, buy them, online, whatever, you've seen charts like this. We have the name of the plant on the left, and they have various attributes on the right. Grows tall, grows short, like sun, like shade. So this slide was from a show I attended 12 years ago by a woman named Kate Venturini, who is in Rhode Island and is trying to convince folks that live along Narragansett Bay to plant native plants to help absorb the pollutants running off the parking lots and the lawns and stuff like that before they get into the bay, keep the bay clean. Really important objective. So I said to Kate at the end of her talk, I said, Kate, where's your edibility column? And she said, oh, we don't tell people that. And I said, why not? She said, we don't want people to eat these plants. We want them to leave them for the wildlife. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. You've got blueberry in your list. Are you suggesting that people plant blueberries and then never go out and pick a blueberry themselves? Oh, we wouldn't do that. Well, I said, you might as well tell them what else is edible. So now in Rhode Island, on their native plant list, they have an edibility column. So this is the point of my talk. The fact that many of our native plants are edible by people too, I think provides an additional powerful incentive for people to plant them that might be insufficiently induced to do so just in the pure ecological rationale. So pardon me while I dwell on stereotypes for a minute. In my mind, imagine husband, wife, living in a good-sized lot, plenty of room for plants, and the wife has heard Doug Tallamy's talk. She says, oh, it's really important, we gotta plant native plants. And the husband says, I like the yard the way it is. I don't wanna change anything. And so that's when she could bring him to one of my talks and then learn about the, it's the what's in it for me angle. It's the, okay, yeah, I'll put something in my yard, but what do I get out of it? So that's fine. So, and a lot of these native plants, you put them in, the birds can eat them. There's usually plenty of berries or nuts, whatever it is that's the edible part. So you can share. And of course, that's how indigenous people interacted with the landscape, is they didn't say, oh yeah, we're gonna have a yard, and we're gonna put native plants in it, but we would never pick anything. Because no, that's for the bugs and the bunnies. We'll go to Walmart and get our food. They need to have the yard. No, it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, at one extreme you have the chemically addicted lawn with the topiary shrubs. At the other end you have the, only for wildlife native plants. We are part of nature, and we can be an active part by bringing native plants in and then sharing them with the wildlife we're planting them with. Okay, so if you want to know what plants are native, there's a really great resource, the Go Botany section of the Native Plant Trust webpage. And so for every species, so here's spicebush, native plant all over the South Shore. So there's the outline map for New England, and you'll see the black outlines there, the county boundaries. And you see if the color is green, that means that species is deemed to be native to that county. So some people, they care about that issue, so they'll consult this, and it's really great. So if that color were pink, that would tell you the plant's not deemed to be native to that county. Another thing that some people care about is the ecotype. They say not only is it important to plant native, but you got to get the local seed and then grow the plant locally. And if you do anything else, it's bad. And I've heard other people make the exact opposite argument, that it's not bad at all. So there's, I think reasonable minds can differ on that issue. What I will say about local ecotype, that if you are able to track down a plant that was grown from seed that was gathered locally and it was grown locally, I think you can make an argument the chances of that plant doing better in your yard is greater than a plant that was shipped in from Minnesota or Mississippi or something like that. Okay, and then if you say, well, all this is good, Russ, but I want to know what's going to work in my yard. So this is when you go back to the Native Plant Trust and they have this native plant, or sometimes they call it a garden plant finder, with all these boxes with attributes, and you just click whatever you want. I want pretty plants, I want short plants, I have a dry yard, I have a wet yard, I have a sloping yard, I have a flat yard, whatever you want, you click the box, and then it will spit out whatever plants meet your criteria that you've set. So I just checked the edible box to see what would show up. And 80 species came out. That's pretty good. There's actually more than 190 species of plants native to northeast ecoregions that are edible by people, but 80 is a pretty good representative sample. So then I clicked on sweet fern, see what pops up there, and there's the sweet fern page with all these other additional details about sweet fern. So great resource if you want to know. And this is stuff, you might be thinking, oh man, to go native in my yard, this is, look at my yard right now, this has got to be, a complete makeover, and it's too much money, and I'm too stressed. And no, you take little bits, at least you go to this website, it's free, and you say, okay, let me, before I ever meet with anybody, let me have an idea of what plants, so I have some knowledge going in. And also, I'll make a suggestion for you. A really simple thing that anybody can do, just about everybody has this opportunity in their own yard, is you walk around, you find an invasive plant like a buckthorn or a ring euonymus or a honeysuckle. You can just pop it out and then drop a native plant in its place. I call that a one-for-one swap. And it's not a complete makeover. You haven't spent thousands of dollars bringing a landscaper in to do a design plan or anything. Just this very simple thing that you can do. And you can feel, okay, well, I've done something, and now I can get ready to take an additional step. But at least I started with that. Okay, so that's one very simple suggestion. Okay, so now I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about specific species you might want to consider for planting in your yard. Everybody ready for that? Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this guy. So probably one of the biggest mistakes that novice foragers make in eastern Massachusetts is with fiddleheads. So we all know these are fiddleheads, but that in and of itself is not enough to know that it's a safe, yummy fern to eat. There are many different species of fern. I only know of 2 species of fern that taste good, only one that's safe to eat in quantity, and that is this one. This is the ostrich fern, and this is the quote-unquote fiddlehead fern, the kind you see for sale in the produce stores, in the fancy restaurants and stuff like that. And by the way, I don't know anybody that's farming ostrich fern. So if you see an ostrich fern on a restaurant menu, it was gathered from the wild. And that's not inherently bad. I do a lot of foraging from the wild myself. It's just the way it's done. Because I encourage folks, if you're gathering native plants in the wild, to use some forbearance and restraint just to make sure that you're not going to upset the ecological balance in any way. And so in the case of an ostrich fern, what I suggest is just limiting your harvesting to just 1 or 2 of the curled up parts per clump. That's it. Let the rest grow out. That's a totally sustainable level of harvest. The fern can absolutely handle that level of picking. Unfortunately, though, what some people will do that are a little greedy is they'll just go in and they'll see a patch of the ostrich ferns. They'll pick every single one. You're sapping a lot of strength and rhizome when you do that. You can actually kill a plant by harvesting it that hard. So just 1 or 2 per clump. And yeah, just to go back to indigenous language, so I learned from an ethnobotanist actually out in the Pacific Northwest that the Mouseet tribe, which inhabits the area that we're now calling Maine and New Brunswick, is their word for the ostrich fern fiddlehead. Masos is the same exact word they use to describe the circling motion a dog makes before it lies down. And when I thought about that, oh yeah, I see the resemblance. And isn't that amazing? I mean, that's what you get for being in a place for thousands of years and just paying attention to patterns and seeing similarities out there. Okay, so this is the habitat that you're going to find ostrich ferns growing naturally. We don't have this in the South Shore. You know, this is like along the Merrimack River or the Connecticut River, you know, your big floodplain rivers. But it will grow in people's yards here. And the other thing to look for, if you're trying to find it in the wild, is what's called the fertile fronds, these little stubby things. That's how the plant reproduces, with spores. And if you cut those in cross section, it also makes the U shape like the celery stalk, like the fiddleheads do. Okay, if you've ever bought fiddleheads at the store and cooked them up and been not particularly impressed with them, you might want to try this cooking method, which was aptly demonstrated to me by a naturalist, Beth Basler, out in the Connecticut Valley, where she took a group of us to a patch of fiddleheads growing along the Connecticut River in the town of Northfield, and she brought her camp stove with her to the fiddlehead patch, and we were eating those fiddleheads 10 minutes after we picked them. They were truly exquisite that way. That was the secret. Okay, so this is just a photo of somebody's yard in Lexington, Mass. And they've got the ostrich ferns growing there. There's another view of the same yard. I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty confident that these people have no clue this is the edible ostrich fern, fiddlehead fern. They just like the way it looks. And so, yeah, so this is an alluvial floodplain soil. It's just somebody's backyard. So this is a plant that, you know, it has its habit preferences that, well, but I understand it's, you know, pretty versatile in terms of where you can get it to grow. Okay, milkweed. Now, milkweed, as we know, has a really important ecological role, and I'll talk about that for a second, but it's edible by people too. Indigenous people knew that. They ate it. There's at least 4 edible stages to the plant, and they happen chronologically in succession, so that's why I call it a procrastinating forager's dream food, because if you mess up and miss a stage, you just wait a while till the next edible stage develops. So this is actually edible stage number 3, when the plant produces the flower buds, and when they're a tight green cluster, you can eat them. You do have to cook them. I'm recommending boiling for 7 minutes, and then they won't get mushy or shrink after all that boiling. So you see the milkweed flower buds in that bowl to the right there. Those were cooked for 7 minutes. They look great. If anything, they look even nicer than they did when they were attached to the plant. And you could eat those just as a plain vegetable, just like that. Or in my book, I've got a recipe for milkweed egg puff, which is like a cross between a souffle and a casserole. They're good that way. And then even the pods are edible when they're about 1 inch long or shorter. You boil them for 7 minutes, and the texture is really similar to, and the flavor is similar to green beans. All right, but there's a monarch butterfly caterpillar to remind us it's really important for milkweed plants to be out in the landscape so the female butterflies can find them and lay their eggs on them and stuff like that. So this is a plant I'm propagating by passing the seeds out to people, growing it in my nursery, planting it out in the landscape, including my own yard. So that's my house in the background. I have a different car now. I still have that same boat. And we have blueberries growing the edges of our driveway, and the milkweed started growing there. And I said, great, we'll let them grow along with the blueberries. And the butterflies found them, and we know that the females lay their eggs in the plants. We know that because one day we went out, and this chrysalis was attached to a hinge in our garage door. Unfortunately, it was on that hinge because when the door went up and down, the chrysalis just rode up and down with the garage door. And so it was like that for 2 weeks. And then one morning we went out and the chrysalis was clear and the butterfly had metamorphosed and flown away. Yeah, so it's really great when you can walk the walk on your own property to balance out whatever foraging you might be doing in the wild. Okay, yes?
Why did you put netting on that?
That was so we would get some of the blueberries. The birds still got a lot. The netting was for the blueberries, not for the milkweed. But thanks for asking. Yes. So, all right. So this is our native member of the linden family called basswood, Tilia americana. I know this grows very nearby to here. And it's got 2 edible stages. The leaves, when they first come out in the spring, they're very soft and supple and mild. You could eat them straight off the tree, put them into salads. You do what they do with them in England, which they call this a lime tree. And they make lime sandwiches, which are like the watercress sandwiches on the white bread with the crust cut off. And they just layer the young linden leaves as the filling for the sandwich. So you can eat the leaves. And also when it blooms, which is around 2nd, 3rd week of June, the blossoms, they're sort of a yellowish white in color. And they give off this wonderful lemon honey fragrance, and that's what the tea tastes like. So you can make the tea from the flowers fresh or dried. And besides tasting good, it has 2 medicinal values. It's soothing to your digestive system and your mental state at the same time. So herbalists really love recommending linden tea to their clients for that reason. Okay, so once again, we get into indigenous knowledge and phenology. The English name for this plant is shadbush, and shad is a fish. Why name a plant after a fish? Because when this plant is blooming, it's telling you this is the same time that the fish, the shad, the anadromous fish are running up the rivers to spawn. And so sometimes the clues you get from plants and landscape are about something else. It's not about that plant, but in this case, it's also about this plant because when this plant blooms, it's showing you where it is. And I encourage folks who are going to get serious about foraging to develop a part of your brain or a notebook to record the locations of plants that are out of season, remember where they are, and then go back and get them when they're in season. So this would be in April. This is 2 weeks before the crab apples bloom. So these really stand out, nothing else blooming at that time. Remember where that spot is, and then around the first day of summer, that's when you want to look for. And now these fruits look like blueberries, but they really don't taste like blueberries. They taste like a cross between cherries and almonds because they're actually related to cherries and almonds, and juneberries are all related plants in the rose family. So this is a great one for stuffing your face right by the tree. Now, it is true that songbirds like these fruits too. But the typical juneberry tree is 12 feet tall, so the songbirds can fly into the upper branches and eat those berries, and you can pick the ones that you can reach from the ground. Usually there's plenty to go around and you can share. So I'm going to tell you a spot. I don't usually do this, but I don't work there anymore, so I'm happy to tell you. I used to work in downtown Boston on Causeway Street near North Station. And as you might know, that's just south of the Charles River. And on my lunch hour, I would walk across the North Washington Street Bridge to a place called Paul Revere Park in Charlestown, where the DCR planted 24 juneberry trees. And I would go there on my lunch hour, late June, early July, and pick like a quart of fruit from these trees in this public park. And so now I would eat a lot of these berries, but I also wanted to do it to get the seeds, to propagate plants from the seeds. So, oh yeah, you can make strudel from juneberries. It's really good. Okay, so seeds are edible, but what I would do is just spit some into my hand, store them in a little plastic bag, and then throw them in a fridge. And usually they'll just be docile and just wait till you sow them, but sometimes they'll start sprouting because most of our native plants have seeds that have to go through a process called stratification, which is just a fancy word for winter. Because our seeds have evolved to need a prolonged period of cold before they sprout, so they don't sprout in November and that get killed by the winter. And so the juneberry seed timers went off in the fridge, in the dark, in the little plastic bags. They started sprouting, and when that happens, you have to sow them. So you just find a sunny windowsill or something, sow them there, and then when it warms up, you can move them outside. So yeah, so I now have 3.5 foot tall juneberry plants in my nursery that I've been planting out on some of my sites that I grew just from seeds I gathered in a public park. Okay, so here's wild strawberry. Just about everybody has some spot for wild strawberry. You've got a mossy, sunny area, grass lawn area, any place that's mowed where there isn't tall things competing with it, you can grow wild strawberries. And the strawberry fruits, the wild strawberry fruits, they are teeny, but they are really yummy. And the flowers attract lots of different species of pollinators visit those flowers. You make tea from the leaves, so it's a great plant. And when I have extra, yes?
Will those self-seed?
Yes, they will self-sow. Yes, but they also do what cultivated strawberry plants do is they're like the spider plant, indoor plants, is they send out those stolons. And then little babies will start to grow on the ends of the little things. And those babies will actually find bare spots in your lawn and help fill them. So yeah, and you can grow them from seed, and they will self-sow. If you leave any seeds behind on the ground, it's very, I'm really impressed when somebody actually makes something from wild strawberries, because that's showing a tremendous amount of self-control. I have to put them in my mouth right away. Okay, so anyway, when I have extra seed, I'm happy to share. So this is a girls' school out in Western Mass, Miss Hall's school, where they have a greenhouse on the campus, and they were growing like little broccoli plants and tomato plants to sell at a spring plant sale. So I gave them wild strawberry plants, and you see they just repurposed the clamshells we're buying our fruits in anyway, put the growing medium in there, sprinkled the seeds in, and they were able to grow the plants big enough that they could sell them with the broccoli and the other things they were selling to their customers in the spring. Okay, so here's our dooryard violet, Viola sororia. It also really does well in a lawn like the strawberry. Doesn't mind getting mowed, doesn't mind getting stepped on. And the leaves are edible, the flowers are edible, and you can candy the flowers and use them for decorating other things. And I have not deliberately grown violets from seed. It's happened by happenstance in my nursery. But what I'll do is just dig them up from my lawn where I have a proliferation of them and pot them up and then give them to other folks to plant elsewhere. Like, for example, one of the people that wanted wild violet plants from me were people growing pollinator gardens, because apparently these flowers are very good for early season blooming for some of the pollinators that need fruits then, nectar and pollen then. Okay, so here is a native raspberry called a flowering raspberry. So did John Belber mention, for those of you that were here for his talk, did he mention that I planted plants in my nursery at Holly Hill Farm? Okay, well, I planted plants in my nursery at Holly Hill Farm, and this is one of the species I planted, and it seems to be doing really well there, which I'm very happy to see. So look, it's got enormous maple-like leaves. It has these gorgeous magenta flowers. These flowers are 2 inches across. That's really showy for a raspberry, and the plants don't have thorns. So this is a plant worth considering for planting in your yard, even if you never ate it, just to look at it. The main edible part are these raspberries, and I have to admit, a regular red raspberry is probably tastier because they're juicier. These fruits tend to be a little bit on the dry side, but the flavor is fine. And then there's the black raspberry, and I don't need to tell you what to do with the black raspberry fruit. I'll tell you the fun thing that black raspberries do, like from October to now, is the canes turn this purpley color. And so you can spot them. You can be like, with the snow in the ground, walking your dog cross-country skiing, and you see these purple thorny canes on the edge of the field. Those are black raspberries. Once again, remember where they are, and they'll go back in late June, early July, and look for the fruit. Okay, elderberries are edible. Some people will pick the flowers and make drinks from them. There's an alcoholic version, there's a non-alcoholic version. I tend to leave the flowers on the plants because if you don't do that, if you pick the flowers, you're never going to get any berries there. So I leave the flowers on the plants and wait for the berries to show up. And this photo is an upside down. That's what the berry clusters tend to do from the weight of the fruit, is they hang upside down like that. I understand that you can get a stomachache if you eat a lot of raw elderberries, but if you dry them first or you cook them first, you can eat all you want. And I like to mix elderberries and apples together. So elderberry apple sauce, elderberry apple pie is more interesting than just plain applesauce or apple pie. Yes?
I went to a foraging workshop last week, and the lady said that there's a lot of cyanide in those, and that's why they need to be cooked.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's a lot of cyanide in them, because if you're getting a stomachache, it's not like you're a secret agent taking a pill to kill yourself because the bad guys caught you. No, it's just and it's not just elderberries.
Oh, I'm sorry,
yeah.
it's cyanide. It's arsenic. I'm sorry.
No, I think it is cyanide.
Oh, maybe it's
Yeah,
cyanide.
but anyway, it's basically it's a chemical that is metabolized into cyanide by the body when you eat it. But if you dry it first or cook it first, you have
You said it was important.
you got rid of it. Okay.
Sell those, like plants?
Do I sell these plants? I don't actually sell any plants in my nursery. Everything I'm growing, I give away. It's not a business, it's just a fun retirement project. And you'll see at the end of my show what happens to my plants. But lots of different nurseries carry elderberry, and it's also very available online to get it shipped to you. Like, for example, Fedco, a business up in Maine where I get a lot of plants. Until April 10th, they have a spring sale going on, and they had many varieties of elderberries on sale at Fedco. I just ordered one. Okay, so this is a really cool plant that I can't tell you that much about eating it because I've only eaten the flower petals, and the flower petals have almost like if you've ever eaten a daylily flower, that's what they're like. They're sort of oniony and soft. But this is a cousin of the plant that we know as marshmallow. Ever wondered why marshmallows, the candy, has such a weird name? Because they used to be made from a plant called the marshmallow. So this is the swamp rose mallow, which is a cousin of the marshmallow, which is actually a European species. So anyway, this is among our most showiest wildflowers there is. This flower is like that, 6 inches across. And it comes, you see, here's 2 varieties where it's solid pink or pink with a red throat. There's also a white variety with a red throat. And one reason you might want to plant this, if you've got a portion of your yard that's really damp where purple loosestrife or Phragmites are trying to grow, you can plant the swamp rose mallow, and it won't eliminate the bad stuff, but it will hang in there and grow and say, I don't care, Phragmites, purple loosestrife, I'm growing here, because it's got a big stout taproots, and once it gets established, it should persist. And so that's a nice place to look at, and you can eat it, but I encourage you to see what various things you can do with it. Okay, so here's Monarda fistulosa, or wild bergamot, and the flavor of the leaves, they smell and taste like oregano. So I do not know why it's called wild bergamot, because that flavor, which is in Earl Grey tea, is actually produced from a citrus fruit. So it's not related to this at all. So I don't understand that. So I would use this for like soups, omelets, casseroles, sausage making, pizza topping, stuff like that. But in the meantime, this is another plant I'm growing that the pollinator folks get very excited about, because apparently the structure of these flowers is such that you have to have a long tongue. You have to be one of our native at-risk wild bumblebee species to really get the goodies from this flower. And so folks that are planting for pollinators, this is one of their top species. And also, I think I say it in the text here, that if you've got, wild species of mints aren't as bad as like spearmint or peppermint, where they can go rampant in your yard and go everywhere you don't want them to grow. I mean, wild mints will spread, but not quite as aggressively. But maybe, you'll plant them in a spot where there's other stuff that you don't like, and you would kind of like the wild mint to spread. Okay, so here's another one, and this one does have a very minty flavor. This is Pycnanthemum muticum, or the broadleaf mountain mint. And you know how a lot of people, perhaps some of you, like to put in bird feeders because you want to bring in birds that you can look at? Well, this is kind of like the plant version of an insect feeder. So you plant this, and I've seen a greater quantity and variety of insects visiting these flowers than anything else I'm growing in my nursery. So it's really fun to have it for that reason. Like this great blue wasp, which is a very scary looking thing, but it's not interested in stinging you at all, but it loves these flowers. Okay, so bayberry, you might say, bayberry, that's all over the place in the South Shore. We don't need to plant bayberry, and I totally understand, but if you've got a challenging site, like a sunny site where the soil's really poor, this would be a good choice, because bayberry grows in nutrient-poor soil because it can do what plants in the pea family can do. It's got the nitrogen-fixing nodules on its root system, so it can tolerate really poor sandy soil. And so can sweet fern. Bayberry and sweet fern are relatives with each other. They have that aromatic quality. So this is one of our native species the American colonists turned to make tea from when they were boycotting the British tea during the Revolutionary War era. They just steeped the leaves in hot water for a few minutes. And same thing with this one, sweet goldenrod. So this one, I've collected seed on the South Shore, got permission from the Conservation Commission where I found it growing, propagated in my nursery, and now I have it there to plant out in appropriate sites. And it's a licorice-flavored goldenrod. How fun is that? So if you're going to plant a goldenrod in your yard, why not plant the licorice-flavored one so you can enjoy it too? Spicebush is another one of our plants the colonists made tea from. So they just steep the twigs in hot water for a few minutes. But I like to gather these berries and eat them. And it's September when they're ripe. And I will gather them fresh and then dry them for several weeks so they lose the beautiful red color and they get kind of wrinkly. But once they're thoroughly dry, you can store them in a little jar and keep them in your pantry. And they'll keep for years without going rancid. And then you grind them up and use them as a savory spice. Soups, omelets, casseroles, like the milkweed egg puff I showed you before. They're really good at it. Now, having said that, these berries are high in food value for migrating songbirds. So there's lipids in them. You know, lipids are a fat, so lots of calories. Birds like that. They need to fatten up for their southward migration. So if you're gathering spicebush berries for the wild, it's really important to leave lots of berries on the plants to make sure the birds get all they need that way. Another reason why you might want to plant spicebush in your yard, oh, I forgot, I got one other thing to talk about. So I grow spicebush from seed, and the critical thing to remember, though, is if you want to try to do that, do not let the seeds dry out because they'll die. So this is one of our native seeds that needs to stay moist in order to stay alive. So if you store it in a plastic bag in your fridge, it'll be fine. Okay, and another thing is I use a lot of what's called the hardware cloth, this half-inch mesh steel stuff over most of the flats in my nursery because I learned from bitter experience that the ravenous rodents will dig stuff up. I mean, a spicebush berry they'll actually eat, but even a sweet goldenrod flat, they'll dig that up just because it's like a kid in a sandbox. Oh, bare dirt, I want to play in it. So I heartily recommend that. Oh, okay, so this is the critter that you might see in your spicebush or your sassafras plant, the spicebush swallowtail butterfly caterpillar. So when the egg first hatches, so this guy right down here, oh, it's not going to show up in the screen. So that looks just like bird poop. So that's an effective disguise. And then when the caterpillar gets to be about 1.5 inches long, it's got these things here. These are fake eye patches. The real eyes are down here. It's trying to impersonate a snake. And even at the pupa stage over here, it looks just like a dried leaf. So isn't it amazing how this organism has evolved all these ingenious disguises to avoid being eaten? Wintergreen, exceedingly common plant in southeast Mass, often under pine trees where the leaf litter isn't hiding them because it's a very low growing plant. So the whole plant has a wintergreen flavor. The berries also have the wintergreen flavor, although they're not that sweet. But when I make a drink from wintergreen, like I did right here, here's some for you to try. So I like to make it from black and yellow birch, and there's a handout right here telling you how to do that. And so, I made this just yesterday. You just gather the birch trees any time of year, just get out a carrot peeler and peel the twigs and put the peeled twigs and peelings in a jar full of water, let it sit around for an hour, and that's it. And then the beverage, for those of you that had it already, tastes like drinking a wintergreen flavored Lifesaver. So very simple. And it's really fun to grow birch trees from seed, which you can gather in the middle of the winter because the strobilus, this guy right here, will shed the seeds in the winter and it'll end up on the surface of the snow. You can just pick them off the surface of the snow. And then you want to sow them on bare ground because they actually need light to germinate. So I have many 3-foot tall black birch trees in my nursery I grew just from gathering seeds that way. Okay, I'm happy to tell you there's no poisonous species of viburnum. Having said that, not all the viburnum's fruits taste good. So like arrowroot, viburnum dentatum fruit doesn't taste good. Maple leaf viburnum fruit doesn't taste good. But there are several that do, like this one, nanny berry, and wild raisin fruit tastes good. Okay, this is not poison sumac. I hope you all knew that. I used to work for the Fish and Game Department. I had colleagues at work that were sure that this was the poison sumac because it was the only sumac they knew of. Well, that must be the poison sumac. That's what poison sumac berries look like. It does grow here in the South Shore in very swampy areas. So if you're in a dry area, it's very unlikely it's going to be. And so that's what poison ivy berries look like because poison ivy and poison sumac are very closely related. So any sumac with these tight, upright clusters of red berries is not only not poison sumac, it's an edible sumac. And you make a drink from the sumac berry clusters, and you just pick them off the plants, put them in a bowl of water, rub them to get the flavor off the berries into the liquid. The liquid turns this pinkish orange color, and then fish the berries out. You're done with them. Take the liquid, pour it through any kind of a filter, and then drink it hot or cold, sweetened or unsweetened. I typically drink it cold and sweetened like pink lemonade. And all this text to the left is just warning you, do not put sumac seeds in your compost unless you want to be picking out sumac plants at least 10 years after you use your quote unquote finished compost. Okay, so I'm still doing that after made this mistake 10 years ago. For me, it's not a big deal because a little sumac plant grows, I pot it up, move it to my nursery, but you might get tired of doing that. Sumac is an underappreciated fall foliage plant. Okay, what is this plant? Right, Charlotte knows she has it growing on her land. But anyway, yes, beach plum. This could be the most important piece of information the entire show for you today. The best time to look for beach plums is in May when the plants are blooming, because then they really stand out in the landscape like this. Because when the fruit is ripe, It's purple colored. Purple is a hard color to see at a distance. You have to be practically standing right next to the bush to know that it's there. So, and beach plums, I love to gather them every September. And you do not have to live near the ocean to plant them, though. I have found them many miles away from the ocean. You just want a sunny, well-drained spot. And you have to have at least 2 genetically distinct plants in order to get any fruit production, because they're not self-fertile. Okay, and yeah, you can make beach plum jam and beach plum rugelach, you know, from the jam and stuff like that. There is an orange fruited beach plum I run into occasionally. And so every beach plum I gather from the wild, I save that pit and I try to grow a plant from the pit. And I have many dozens of beach plums in my nursery I grew from pits that I gathered from the wild. So this is the fox grape that I hope some of you have experienced the joy of just, you know, minding your business, just walking, riding your bike around in September, and all of a sudden, grapes, where's that smell coming from? And you follow your nose to the vine and find the ripe grapes and stuff your face by the vine, which is a lot of fun. So this one's great. You know, usually you have no trouble picking these many grapes from just a part of a harvest from one wild vine. They can be really prolific. Grape cheesecake is a fun thing to do with them. There is another species called the riverside grape that's also native to this area, where the grapes are smaller and kind of musky and not as yummy as the fox grape. But some people say this is the best species for making the stuffed grape leaves. So that would be in the spring, June into early July. You gather the leaves and then you stuff them. And it's a really fun thing to make. Hazelnuts, so in this basket I have some hazelnuts, but any nut in this basket, I cannot put it in the ground and get it to grow, because these have dried out, so they've lost their viability. You have to keep nuts moist to get them to grow. But I do gather them every year. There's the beaked hazelnut. I gather them under power lines. Why is that? Well, I don't think it's the electromagnetic radiation. I think it's just all the sun the plants are getting. And also, if it's one of those wide power line corridors, that's a scary place for a squirrel or chipmunk to be, because there's hawks and snakes and foxes and all kinds of things that want to eat them there. So the nuts tend to stay on the shrubs, and I get to find them, get my share myself. So I gather many of them. And okay, so I'm propagating many hazelnut trees in my nursery from wild nuts I gathered. All oak trees produce acorns, and all acorns are edible. The question is, how bitter are they? And there's some difference tree to tree and species to species. In general, the acorns with the rounded lobes, like what you're seeing here, the white oak acorns, they tend to have lower levels of tannic acid. Shagbark hickory, my #1 favorite edible species, and I think I have some, I've got a jar of shagbark hickory nuts for you right here. So please try this. If you never had them, you definitely want to try these. You see why I get so excited about them. So the name comes from pauca hickory, which is the indigenous preparation, the parge that's really delicious that you can make from shagbark hickory nuts. So this is my #1 favorite edible wild species out of everything I'm gathering. So I love to propagate this one from seed. I love to gather, I love to eat it, I love to share it with people. So this recipe's in my book. This is maple hickory nut pie, a New England version of pecan pie. Virtually everybody I fed this pie to say, this is even better than pecan pie. So as you find, okay, and these are several different cookies I make from shagbark hickory. So I didn't make any of these for you today, but I did make something else. Okay, so there's the shagbark hickory nuts that I stratify. I store moist in the bags in the fridge until I'm ready to sow them. Then when you pull them out and they warm up to room temperature, they'll start to sprout, and then you could sow them. And it takes at least 20 years from a tree that you grow from a nut to be big enough to start producing nuts on its own. That does not deter me in the least from planting them. The Chinese have this wonderful saying that is so apt to this situation. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So I definitely follow that philosophy. And once again, you see that hardware cloth I put on there to keep the ravenous rodents from digging up those trees. And what I
Get it off, like,
oh, you mean how do, so you get some tin snips and just cut around to pull the trees up. Yeah, but you know, that's for shagbark hickory. For hazelnuts, I could just lift it off if I'm patient.
right, the other picture
Right.
I had the same question.
Right.
How do you get it off?
Right, right. No, it's not a big deal. And you can reuse it. You could just push it back together and reuse it. So what I say to myself, if the squirrels and chipmunks only knew what I was doing, planting all these nut trees, how their progeny are going to benefit from all these trees and landscape. But no, they're thinking short term, and we humans, we can relate to that because we often think short term too. Okay, so black walnuts. So lots of these in the South Shore. Holly Hill Farm, John Belber, You can go there and gather black walnuts. They don't want you purloining their crops, but they've got a ton of black walnuts that just drop on the roads all through the farm. And they say they're fine with anybody coming and filling up baskets like this with black walnuts. They're going to be ripe around the second week October is when to go there and start doing that. You do not have to gather these off the tree. Wait till they hit the ground, and then they're going to look like that. They're going to look like old tennis balls just piling up on the ground. And you have to get that husk off, and it's kind of a messy task, but this handout will give you some clues on how to do that. And then you've got to get these open, and this is another challenge because these shells are really hard. They will break most conventional nutcrackers. So here's the device I use. I got it from a company in Oklahoma. Works really well, and you get big pieces out. And then the handout I have here gives you the recipe for this one, the black walnut baklava. But the thing I made for you are black walnut honey squares that are right here. So as soon as I'm done talking, you come up and say, well, why don't we just start passing them around? Let's not stand on ceremony here. Okay, so here's a whole bunch of other native trees that produce edible nuts and berries that I don't have time to talk about with you today. But there's a good sample of them right there. Okay, so in the last 10 minutes, I'm just going to tell you what I'm doing with all these things I'm growing. So since I retired from my day job with the Mass Fish and Game Department in 2015, I'm playing the role of Johnny Appleseed for native edible species. So I set up a nursery in Weston, Mass, where I grew up, where I'm propagating many hundreds of plants, most of which I'm growing from seed that I gather myself, and then I work out arrangements with cities and towns, state and federal agencies, tribal groups and individuals, organic farms, land trusts, and others, just to plant plants in my nursery in appropriate places in their properties. And I've done at least 24 projects so far. So here's a list I compiled. This is online. If you have any trouble finding it, let me know. I'll point you to it, of all the edible native species I know of for the Northeast region. So that's over 190 species. So I am growing a subset of that in my nursery. So there's my stratification fridge. It's a little bit neater than it was when I took this picture. But, it is, it's wild, alive seed, so it is a little messy. So I wouldn't do this to my wife and put this in our regular fridge, So this has got it's like a big dorm-style fridge in the basement is where I keep the seed. Okay, and then I'm mostly sowing stuff outside because remember, native plants, that's what they're used to. They're not used to being pampered or coddled. They're used to growing outside. So you can sow the seeds outside, let the weather get at them. I wish this happened all the time. This may be a thing of the past where we actually see snow cover on plants over a prolonged period in the winter, which is very sad, but that's ideal. If you can get that, that's your best blanket of anything. And then some stuff like the precocious seed that sprouts early, I'll sow inside of my mom's solar room. Here's a couple photos of what my nursery looks like. And you don't have to read this, but this is just a few examples of some of the projects where I've done things, so I'll go through these quickly. So there's an island that the trustees of reservations owns off the coast of Marblehead called Crown and Shield Island. And I used to lead edible wild plant walks there all the time, and I noticed there are no beach plums out there. And so I asked the trustees, can I plant some beach plums? And they said, sure. So I walked the island, figured out good places to plant the beach plums, or dug the holes, organized some volunteers. We took them across the mud flat at low tide to get the plants out there. Then we put them in the ground, and this is one of my first projects, so I'd be lying if I said every single plant we put in is thriving. No, I made a few rookie mistakes, like a couple of the spots I picked were probably too close to the salt water, and the plants just got too much salinity and they didn't like it. But at least 6 of the plants were thriving and producing fruit. And that was pretty good for one of my early projects. Then another island, this is Baker's Island in Salem, that 10 acres of which is owned by a National Heritage Area. And they said, Russ, bring some of your plants out here. So I do an annual Wild Edibles Day on this island where I talk about all the plants that were already there, the edible ones, plus all the additional ones that I added to the landscape there. Then going on the other side of the state, Great Barrington, Mass, in the Berkshires, there's a place called Riverwalk in downtown Great Barrington where they took a classic abused, neglected river with the rebar and the cinder blocks just pitched over the side, Japanese knotweed growing everywhere. They got all that out. They put in nice soil. They put in native plants, and now it's this gorgeous, wonderful amenity to the community instead of an eyesore. And so that's a place where I've led walks, where I've got a bunch of plants growing there. Like sassafras, you might say, oh, sassafras, who would ever plant sassafras? It's such a weed around here. It's not in the Berkshires. It's actually an unusual plant to find there. But it is native to the Berkshires, so I planted some for my nursery there, and it's thriving. And hobblebush, which is not a plant you're going to run into very much in the South Shore, if at all, there is some on the North Shore, it will grow. It's growing very well there. And when I see plants that I put in thriving, I feel I can read those plants' minds. And the plants are saying to me, Russ, thank you so much for planting me here. I'm really happy here. Okay, so here's a municipal project. This is a daylighting project where a town had a pipe that collapsed in a public park, and instead of replacing the pipe, they just pulled it out and daylighted the stream, and then they had to replant the area, so I came up with a planting plan for them, and then the town and volunteers for the town and the consultant and the contractor all came with plants, and then we put them in. So there's that flowering raspberry again doing really well in a spot where I just looked at the landscape and I said, I think this native species is going to be happy if I put it in there. So here's one of my more recent projects. There's a Miyawaki forest, this Japanese guy who passed away a few years ago, who came up with this idea of densely planting many hundreds of plants very close together. And so they took an old dump, which is now Danahy Park in Cambridge, and they put in a Miyawaki forest. And so I found out about this project. I said, well, I've got plants, I'll help. So I brought plants to my nursery. There's an aerial view of it. There was a big write-up in the New York Times about this last fall. So it's kind of an in thing right now. I mean, you know, this was the first one that went in the Northeast just back in 2021. So, okay, so maybe you recognize some people in this photo. This is a group that had a table out in the tabling area, Wild Ones South Shore. It's a chapter of a national organization called Wild Ones, and their mission is to get people to plant native plants in their yard, which is part of my mission too, at least in terms of this talk, part of what I'm talking about. So they have a seed swap, and so I had extra seed for my nursery, so I brought them down. All right. 2 books, I'm almost done. 2 books I just want to suggest if you want to, one of these people likes to say, I like to sit in an armchair and just really marinate in this stuff before I actually do anything in my yard. This would be a good book to get. And also this book, which came out relatively recently. This is written by a native plant nursery operator in the New Jersey Highlands near the Delaware River. And I think he does an eloquent job. You know, I'm doing this as an act of gratitude to thank Mother Nature for all the stuff I've been nibbling on all these years. And he's trying to say it's really important to our souls as well as our bodies and the landscapes that we share with our animals that we care so much about to do this transformation to landscape. So with that, I'm done. Thank you.